There was a time when coaches around the NFL quietly believed the smartest defender in football played in Denver. Not in Pittsburgh, not in Dallas, not in Oakland, Denver. He did not scream at opponents. He did not chase cameras. He did not build a larger-than-life football persona that television could sell to America. But every Sunday, offenses walked onto the field knowing one thing first. Number 53 already knew where they wanted to go. In the late 1970s, the Denver Broncos built one of the most feared defenses football had ever seen. The Orange Crush defense became the identity of an entire city, brutal against the run, disciplined in the middle of chaos, relentless for 4 quarters. And standing at the center of all of it was Randy Gradishar. Quarterbacks rarely mentioned him publicly because linebackers were not marketed like quarterbacks or flashy pass rushers back then, but coaches saw it on film every week. Running backs saw it when rushing lanes disappeared before they even opened. Offensive coordinators saw it when entire game plans collapsed because one defender refused to make mistakes. Randy Gradishar was not built for headlines, he was built for football itself. He became Defensive Player of the Year. He led Denver to its first Super Bowl. Many players from his era believed he belonged beside the greatest linebackers ever to play the game. Yet decades later, his name nearly vanished from mainstream football history. No endless highlight packages, no constant documentaries, no mythology repeated every season on national television. Just silence. And maybe that is the strangest part of all. Football never truly forgot the loudest legends. It forgot one of its quietest. How does the leader of one of the greatest defenses in NFL history slowly disappear from America's memory? Randy Gradishar was born in 1952 in Champion, Ohio, far away from the glamour the NFL would later chase. Nothing about his childhood looked destined for celebrity. No giant spotlight. No larger-than-life personality. Just cold-weather discipline and football culture built around toughness instead of attention. Even as a young athlete, people noticed something unusual about him. He was not emotional on the field. He was controlled. Coaches trusted him because he rarely lost focus. While other players relied on raw aggression, Gradishar relied on positioning, timing, and anticipation. He seemed to understand angles naturally. Wrestling helped shape that part of him early. Balance mattered. Leverage mattered. Discipline mattered. Those traits would eventually define his entire football career. By the time he arrived at Ohio State Buckeyes, the program was still one of the toughest environments in college football. Woody Hayes demanded obedience, physicality, and mental endurance from every player inside the locker room. Many talented athletes struggled under that pressure. Randy Gradishar thrived in it. He was not the loudest voice on the team. He did not carry himself like a future football icon. But coaches kept noticing the same thing every week. He almost never made the wrong read. He diagnosed plays faster than most linebackers around him. Running backs could not shake him because he took away space before they even reached it. Some linebackers attacked football like chaos. Gradishar attacked it like mathematics. By the early 1970s, NFL scouts already understood he would become a professional player. The only question was whether a quiet, fundamentally perfect linebacker could become the centerpiece of an entire defense at the next level. Then the Denver Broncos selected him in the first round of the 1974 draft. At the time, Denver was not viewed as a glamorous football destination. The Broncos were still searching for identity. They were not America's team. They were not a dynasty. They were not even fully respected across the league yet. But hidden inside that draft pick was the foundation of everything Denver football would eventually become. The Broncos did not just draft a linebacker. They drafted the brain of a future football empire. Before Randy Gradishar arrived, the Denver Broncos were still trying to convince the football world they mattered. They had fans, they had tough players. But they did not yet have an identity powerful enough to stand beside the great franchises of the 1970s. That changed when the Orange Crush defense was born. The nickname sounded colorful and marketable, but the defense itself was ruthless. Denver built a unit based on pressure, discipline, and relentless tackling. Opposing offenses often described games against the Broncos as exhausting. There were no easy yards. Every play felt crowded, every mistake became dangerous. And standing in the middle of it all was Randy Gradishar. He became the defensive signal caller almost naturally. Teammates trusted him because he understood the entire field. Coaches trusted him because he could adjust the defense seconds before the snap without panic. What made him terrifying was not pure violence. It was how quickly he recognized what offenses wanted to do. Some linebackers chased football. Gradishar arrived where the football was going. Film study became one of his greatest weapons. Offensive linemen later admitted he often seemed one step ahead before the play even started. Running backs hated facing him because cutback lanes disappeared instantly. Quarterbacks struggled attacking the middle of the field because Gradishar constantly disrupted timing. And unlike many defensive stars of the era, he almost never lost control emotionally. No screaming for cameras, no theatrical intimidation. Just complete command of the defense. That made him different from famous linebackers like Jack Lambert or Dick Butkus. Those players became cultural symbols partly because of personality and image. Gradishar never chased that role. He looked more like a coach trapped inside a linebacker's body. But football people noticed. Coaches around the league respected him deeply because disciplined defenders were rare in that era. The 1970s were chaotic football. Missed assignments happened constantly. Defenses depended on instinct and brutality. Yet week after week, Gradishar stayed under control, while everyone around him played at full violence. That consistency transformed Denver. The Broncos no longer felt like outsiders. They became contenders. Mile High Stadium became one of the loudest environments in football because the defense gave the city something it had never fully owned before: pride. And even though Orange Crush became famous nationally, many people still failed to understand the truth hidden underneath it all. The system worked because Randy Gradishar made it work. By 1978, Randy Gradishar was no longer simply respected inside football circles. He had become one of the most dominant defensive players in the entire NFL. This should have been the season that made him immortal. The Orange Crush defense had fully evolved into a nightmare for offenses. Denver played fast, disciplined football, while much of the league still depended on raw physical intimidation. Gradishar controlled everything in the middle. He read blocking schemes instantly. He shut down rushing attacks before they developed. And somehow, despite constantly battling through traffic, he always seemed balanced and under control. That season felt endless for opposing offenses. Some teams tried attacking outside to avoid him. Others tried flooding the middle with blockers. None of it worked consistently. Coaches around the league started describing him as one of the smartest defenders football had ever produced. Not the loudest. Not the meanest. The smartest. And then came the recognition. Randy Gradishar won Defensive Player of the Year. For a moment, it looked like football finally understood what Denver had been watching for years. The Broncos reached the playoffs again. The defense remained elite. Gradishar became the centerpiece of national conversations about linebacker play. Young coaches studied his positioning on film because he almost never wasted movement. He turned defense into efficiency. But even at the peak of his career, something strange was happening around the league. Football itself was beginning to change. The late 1970s pushed the NFL toward television entertainment on a larger scale than ever before. Quarterbacks became easier to market. Explosive offenses became easier to celebrate. Flashy personalities became easier to turn into national celebrities. Randy Gradishar did not fit any of that. He was quiet, reserved, professional almost to a fault. Even his greatness looked subtle unless someone truly understood football strategy. He did not produce dramatic sack celebrations. He did not start fights. He did not dominate commercials or magazine covers. He simply erased offenses one possession at a time. And that became the hidden tragedy of his career. Because while football coaches understood exactly how valuable he was, mainstream football culture slowly moved toward players who created spectacle. The game was becoming entertainment as much as competition. Gradishar belonged to an older version of football. One built around discipline instead of celebrity. Looking back now, 1978 should have permanently placed him among the most unforgettable defenders in NFL history. Instead, it became the highest point before history slowly started letting him disappear. The hardest part about disappearing from football history is that it rarely happens all at once. There is no announcement, no ceremony, no moment where the league openly decides to leave someone behind. It happens slowly. And for Randy Gradishar, it happened almost silently. By the early 1980s, the NFL was entering a different era. The league was becoming faster, louder, and far more driven by television personalities. Quarterbacks started dominating national marketing campaigns. Offensive football became the center of conversation. Highlight culture slowly replaced the quieter appreciation coaches once had for disciplined defenders. At the same time, the Denver Broncos themselves were changing. Then came John Elway. Elway deserved every bit of attention he received. He became one of the defining quarterbacks of his generation. But his arrival also shifted the identity of Denver football forever. The franchise that once terrified teams through the Orange Crush defense slowly became associated with quarterback heroics and dramatic comeback victories. The old defensive identity faded into the background. And as that happened, Randy Gradishar faded with it. Unlike other legends from the 1970s, he did not leave behind an endless collection of famous television moments. There was no iconic personality for sports media to recycle every season. No controversial quotes. No sideline explosions. No mythology built for highlight shows. Even his greatness became difficult to package for modern audiences. How do you explain a linebacker whose greatest skill was almost never being out of position? How do you turn intelligence into a viral football memory? That problem haunted his legacy for decades. Older coaches still praised him constantly. Former players respected him deeply. Many believed he had been one of the most complete linebackers football had ever produced. Yet outside serious football circles, his name slowly stopped appearing in conversations about the greatest defenders in league history. Then came the Hall of Fame wait. Year after year, fans and former teammates argued that Gradishar belonged in Canton. Many believed the delay itself exposed how forgotten the Orange Crush era had become. Other linebackers from bigger media markets remained visible in football culture. Randy Gradishar remained trapped in football's background. The silence became painful. A generation of younger fans grew up barely understanding who he was. Some had heard of Orange Crush. Very few understood who controlled it. And maybe that says everything about how football remembers people. The game rarely forgets the loudest legends. It often forgets the men who quietly held entire dynasties together. For many years, Randy Gradishar existed in a strange place inside football history. He was not fully forgotten, but he was no longer fully remembered either. Among old coaches, former players, and serious football historians, his reputation never disappeared. In those circles, people still spoke about him with enormous respect. They remembered the discipline, the intelligence, the consistency. They remembered a linebacker who almost never made mistakes during one of the most violent eras the sport had ever seen. But outside those football rooms, silence continued growing. Modern fans often celebrate defenders through statistics that create excitement instantly. Sacks, forced fumbles, violent highlight hits, viral moments replayed for years across television and social media. Randy Gradishar represented a different kind of greatness. His game was built on preventing chaos before chaos even happened. That does not always survive history well. The deeper football evolved into entertainment, the more players like Gradishar became difficult for younger audiences to emotionally connect with. His highlights looked subtle compared to modern edge rushers flying into quarterbacks. His personality remained private compared to the branding culture surrounding modern athletes. But football people never stopped seeing him. Film analysts studied his positioning and tackling angles years later because they still looked nearly perfect. Coaches continued using examples of his discipline to teach linebackers how to control the middle of the field. Older opponents still described him as exhausting to play against because he forced offenses into mistakes without gambling out of position. That was his genius. He played defense without ego. And eventually, after decades of waiting, the Hall of Fame finally came. For many fans in Denver, the moment felt emotional but bittersweet. The recognition mattered. It validated everything older generations had argued for years. But it also forced football to confront an uncomfortable truth. Why had it taken so long? How does a Defensive Player of the Year, the leader of the Orange Crush defense, and one of the smartest linebackers in league history, spend decades outside Canton? The answer may simply be timing. If Randy Gradishar played in the modern era, football analytics would probably adore him. Coaches would flood social media with breakdowns of his positioning. Podcasts would praise his intelligence every week. Younger fans might finally understand how dominant he truly was. But he arrived too early. Too early for branding. Too early for modern football media. Too early for a league that eventually rewarded spectacle more than quiet perfection. Some legends are erased by scandal. Some are erased by failure. Randy Gradishar was erased by time itself. There are some football legends whose stories survive forever because the league keeps replaying them. The hits, the sound bites, the personalities, the mythology. But players like Randy Gradishar remind us that some of the most important men in football history were never built for celebrity in the first place. He did not chase attention. He did not turn himself into a brand. He simply mastered football at the highest level possible. For years, he stood at the center of one of the greatest defenses the NFL had ever seen. He made impossible offenses look ordinary. He became the brain of the Orange Crush defense and helped transform the Denver Broncos from outsiders into contenders. And yet somehow history still allowed him to drift into the background. Maybe that is because football changed. The sport became louder, faster, more marketable. Television needed stars who could dominate headlines. Modern media needed personalities that could generate endless conversation. Randy Gradishar never wanted any of that. He belonged to an older version of football. A version where discipline mattered more than fame. A version where intelligence mattered more than attention. A version where linebackers quietly controlled games without demanding the world notice them. That version of football is slowly disappearing now. But the people who truly understand the game never forgot what Randy Gradishar was. Not flashy, not theatrical, not manufactured. Just one of the greatest linebackers football ever produced. And maybe that is the real tragedy of forgotten legends. Sometimes they do everything right, and history still moves on without them.